Hi, I'm Katie Gavenus, an educator with the Center for Alaskan Coastal Studies, and today we're out in our backyard looking at some edible and medicinal plants. I'm here in Washington State, but many of these are similar to what you'd find in South Central Alaska. And one I'd like to point out is this plant right here. This is a lady fern, and it forms fiddleheads. So those are kind of tightly furled fronds here that emerge from out of the soil. And if you look closely, you can see a really tightly coiled fiddlehead down here at the base. And those are edible from most species of fern that grow in Washington State and all species of fern that grow in South Central Alaska. But you do want to make sure you identify them correctly, because there are some species like bracken fern that aren't edible or that can cause issues for people. But the lady fern and the wood fern are edible in that fiddlehead stage. You want to find them when they're just coming out of the soil and still tightly coiled. No more than about 3 or 4 inches tall, but ideally just poking out when they're still wrapped up in a really tight spiral. And it's really important to cook these first. They have an enzyme that can deplete vitamin B in your body if you eat them raw. So you want to make sure that you cook them first. And I like them with a little bit of butter and garlic. And you definitely, there's some like fuzzy parts on the outside. You want to get that off as well. But they're pretty delicious, and I think they taste kind of like asparagus. And they're one of my favorite things to eat in the spring. If you do harvest them, be careful not to take all of the fiddleheads from a fern, because you want it to be able to sprout these fronds, photosynthesize, and reproduce. So just take a few from each kind of root area, or actually technically a rhizome area, and be respectful of the plant. Okay, so right here next to our nettles, we have a really common plant. You're probably familiar with it. It's dandelion. And many people think of dandelion as kind of a weedy plant. And it definitely does grow prolifically in places like gardens and lawns where we maybe want other plants to grow, but dandelion is a pretty cool plant and has lots and lots of uses. And the most common one has to do with the leaves. So early in the spring, typically before the dandelion flowers, you can harvest the leaves and they're edible. Some people eat them raw, but I prefer to steam them or cook them a little bit. That gets rid of a little bit of the bitterness, but they're really, really high in lots of different vitamins and minerals, including vitamin A, vitamin B, and vitamin C. So basically this is like taking your daily vitamin if you were to eat some dandelion leaves. You do need to be careful about where you harvest them, because they can pull toxins out of the soil if they're anywhere where pesticides have been applied or along the side of roads or things like that. You want to avoid harvesting dandelions from those areas. One other cool thing about them, if you pick dandelions, you'll notice that there's this kind of white milky substance, and that is a natural latex, just like from the rubber tree. And in fact, it was used during World War II in Russia to manufacture rubber, which is pretty cool. And if you are to pick the dandelions, it's pretty sticky, and that's part of what gives the greens their bitter taste. So definitely important to pick them early on in the season when they're not quite as bitter. Also, the root of the dandelion is edible. You can roast it like you would a potato during the kind of spring or fall season. And I've even heard of people kind of roasting it up and then using it to make a coffee substitute. But I don't much like coffee, so I don't think I would much like the coffee substitute either. And finally, they're just a pretty beautiful plant if you look closely at them.